Hello, and welcome to Warren Blog. This is a nailing it down episode, and it's one I wasn't intending to do, and one that uh, requires a little bit more unpacking than most nailing it downs. This is not a historical explainer. This is not a conceptual explainer exactly. This is about my increasing doubts about the field of economics, not just Austrian economics or neoclassical economics, the entire field and its pretensions toward science. And this will go to other social sciences too, but it's something that I think we kind of need to deal with a little bit directly. I was arguing with a friend of mine who I have argued with a lot, is a MMT friend of mine. And we were discussing Jerome Powell's statements to Congress and what the Fed's operating on its theory of inflation, that cutting back on 1 to 2% of the inflationary costs would be beneficial, and the way to do that is to raise the interest rates, which makes debt more costly, and thus should lead to a decline in liquidity, and thus, in conventional economic terms, should raise unemployment. Now, it has not raised unemployment significantly. There was actually a payroll increase of 300,000 in May, but the unemployment situation has ticked up just a little bit from February. And that's according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I'll link it in the show notes. So what my friend was saying, and my friend Simon Kangaroo, has a ring of the possibility of truth to it, even though it's counterintuitive to what Powell says. But I'm going to state his argument as best I can, which I also believe is Warren Mosler's argument. Talk about what we have empirically to look at, and then talk about the nature of overclaiming from aggregate data. Because I think in a whole lot of series, I've noticed that everyone can produce aggregate data to back up their claims. Claims of profitability increase, profitability rate increases are there. But also, depending on how you look at GDP, you can also see overall profitability growth rates declining, etc. I'm not here to say that these aggregations don't tell you something. I actually don't believe that. But I don't think they tell you as much as most people want to assume they do. And I think this is something we really have to be skeptical of, not just with mainstream economics, but with economics in general. Because of the factors most of these aggregates have to leave out. And in here, I'm not talking about some abstraction about value or power relations, although these things are important and maybe are also explanatory here. Nor am I saying, strictly speaking, that most economists are even wrong. So I want to talk about what claim is being made. The assumption is by my modern monetary theorist friend, I'll even mention his name, Sen Kangaroo, he's been on the show, tells me that what Powell is actually doing by raising the interest rate is securing employment. Now, we've already talked about an unemployment slight tick up. That's fair and fine, but it is minor. We also have to talk about the fact that we're still down a whole lot of of people employed in the United States. That hasn't changed either. But Kangaroo states, and with some evidence, even though I think a lot of this causal evidence is from deductive reasoning, which could be valid, but it's very hard to prove in an empirical sense. But I think there is some empirics to back this up, that you'd have to raise rates to more than like 10-15% for it to affect payroll in the developed world. And I think that's probably true, actually, because the cost of business, particularly payroll and benefits, would need to be, and payroll generally includes benefits, but the cost would need to be higher than any gains made on the market from paying out of interest. And we must remember that most bonds are not owned by like China, despite what people may tell you. They're owned by well-off business people, businesses, etc., which is why QE could even do anything with toxic assets. So what does this mean? Well, if interest cost on debt is high, it also means that payouts from the Fed and interbank lending are high. And we are not seeing that trickle down to the consumer, but that is going to be the case on people who hold new issue bonds. And Warren Mosler does have some pretty significant evidence in the expansion of high-end new home sales, while home ownership under the current rates are low. There's been a pretty big increase in the buying of modern contemporary arts and luxury homes, etc. And that the S&P 500 has been on a tear lately. So we have to ask ourselves, which is more likely to be true, this explanation or the standard one? The standard one, that raising the cost of debt will reduce the money supply, clearly is not true. And it assumes that the Fed's not paying out on that interest. So if people hold new bonds, they should get good interest on them, and the rich can afford bonds. Now, I say this we have to ask ourselves, at minimum, is the neoclassical way of explaining this possible? Because while we are seeing a lot of average people being hurt in the current debt environment, high-end home rates aren't changing, etc. If you ask yourself what would be going into the economy of, say, a 5% interest rate hike on the national debt of $32 trillion, that would be $1.6 trillion roughly, according to Sam Kangaroo. I'm not doing that math. Injected into the economy. But injected only at the high end in an aggressive manner, which is what Sam would say. This would be a backdoor aggressive way of keeping payroll stable. And from the bank balance end of things, I don't see a whole lot of disproof of this. I'll list the housing numbers in the show notes. But I don't know that I'm convinced that this is what's causing the lack of unemployment. One, because we are seeing an uptick in unemployment. And two, because I'm not convinced that this look at the elites at all really has much to do with payroll, unless, and this is a strong unless, interest rates were at 10-15% and the cost of maintaining debt was well above the cost of payroll. Now, I say this because I can very well see many other causal factors contributing to the problem that aren't just about federal interest rates. Trying to reassure that's going weirdly too. I can talk about that at another time. The shrinking of the working population and no increase in immigration, which is not leading to stronger wages and other things, which is also something that conventional economics would predict would happen. If you were to cut, labor elasticity, aka shorten your labor supply, then theoretically pay should go up as a proportion of business cost, and it's not. So we have to ask ourselves a couple of questions. One, in this relationship, if interest rates are low, private debt is cheap, debt goes up, monetary flows increase, all kinds of sectors do have better investment conditions, although most investment is not going into productive capacity right now, and there's data for that, and that complicates all my points of view on this. Okay, but if you raise interest rates, it actually still injects money into the economy because you have to pay out on the interest rates. It's just on the backs of people who are debt holders. And while most businesses are debt holders, they also hold debt, and maybe on wash, they actually get more payouts and more money injected into the economy than not. The MMTers will call this the bathtub analogy. You will notice, however, that the bathtub is an enclosed system. In fact, if it works correctly, it's a hermetically enclosed system of which you control the spigot by controlling the dials of money. But the actual monetary system and actual trade flows are not subject to just one nation. So treating national balances and surplus like this is solely causal. You can only do if you are only treating the economy as a national economy. So is Sam right that interest rates are keeping unemployment down by injecting a bunch of money at the top end of the economy? Frankly, I don't know. It's a possibility. It's a very real one. It mathematically kind of works out in some ways, but it doesn't mathematically work out clearly enough for me to say that it's causal. And here lies the rub. While MMT, at least more than, say, neoclassical economics, doesn't have market equilibriums, marginality theory, or stuff that requires the abolition of time and modeling, thank God, it does kind of assume that national bank balances are cohesive and can capture most of what's going on. And that all we need to do is look at the amount of the money supply, which is actually represented by the national debt, and see where it's flowing. And since Congress won't direct it in any particular area, this is going to be flowing through either quantitative easing, low bank-to-bank lending rates, or through high payouts on bonds. But the thing is, while there's a lot of stuff to back up that this is definitely part of what's going on, I don't think it explains all of it. One, assets have been increasing on markets gangbusters regardless of what is being done, QE or not, interest payments or not, etc. Almost nothing seems to do it. Two, it's not going into what we would normally call productive industries. Now, I say that, I'm not saying that to say that it's not going into the economy. It is. It's not going into, what we consider like marginal production. It's going into all kinds of other rent forms, speculative forms, things that have higher interest rate returns. And particularly if bonds have this high interest rate, 5% or whatever, then you got to get more in there. But in the past, it seems like the economy could actually handle much higher interest rates without massive results. But part of that was because the interest rates on, say, like a home, 10, 15, in the case of the UK, 16% interest rate on a house that is worth 1/20th of what it is now is still a lower amount of money on the income, on the lower end of the income bracket. So all these things get exponentially weirder and more fragile as the asset values nominally increase. How real are they is hard to say. Now, if this seems confused to you, it seems confused to me too. Not that, I think actually Sam's explanation, which I'm not even going to take as the MMTer's explanation, I'm going to take it as a MMTer's explanation in line with what Warren Mosler's analysis. And I do think it explains part of what's going on, but the causal weight given to just monetary flows is fascinating, because I've heard predictions made by MMTers before, for example, that in 2020 we were going to enter a deflationary economy. And lo and behold, we didn't, although COVID complicates this and no one can claim the win whether or not it happened or not, right? Conversely, I've seen plenty of decent mathematical evidence for the decline in rates of profits, and that showing what sectors are getting invested in and which ones aren't, why productive investment doesn't seem to be happening as much, etc. Both of these things have empirical data to back them up, but they can't both be true. Or if they are both true, the explanations that we have for why one would be true and the other would be true can't both be true. How can it be that the rich are going to profit no matter what, and the traditional means of making profits have so fundamentally shifted, and it's not going to have much effect of unemployment unless both rates goes up to the point that either bank breaks or rates go down and the payout on bonds lowers? But again, unemployment was not high when rates were down either. Now, I know they'll say the causal mechanism is different because QE, etc., but this kind of seems ad hoc. It's done to explain the numbers. And these numbers are aggregations. They're abstractions. I'm not saying that you can't use abstractions to learn things. That would make me against both language and math. But it gives me reason to doubt that anyone actually completely understands what is going on in the economic world. Maybe the MMTers are closer, but I still think, and I'll stand by this, that they're only looking at currency flows. They're not looking at what's being made, why systemic things are breaking down, etc. Now, currency flows are good for actually explaining stuff like wealth and income inequality, so maybe it's something we should take seriously. But it seems weird that no matter what you do, the bourgeoisie is going to benefit, and large and rich holders of capital are going to benefit no matter what. That's all. This is not to dispute Sam. Like I said, I think his causal explanation is deductively reasonable from what we have, if you assume that bank balances are super explanatory. Maybe they are. But everyone needs to doubt more. Have a good day.